Hello, everyone. We're back. We were talking earlier about all the events that are happening and the possibility of tomorrow being a day of jihad, and we are going to talk about that a little bit more. If you are joining us later, thank you for listening. Make sure to hit that follow button and that subscribe button. I am currently not live on TikTok while I'm doing this. This is strictly for YouTube, and we will go on TikTok a little bit later because I feel like giving a little bit of background on the situation, what's going on in Israel, between Palestine, Israel, and Hamas is important to talk about. So I feel like we can do that, which is hard to kind of do on TikTok, but here we can give you guys some additional things to look at, as well as, answer some questions as we go. So with that being said, let's kind of take it back a little bit. So we know something's going on currently with, Israel, Palestine, Hamas. I'm going to first off start by saying this, that Hamas is not representative of Palestine. Yes, there are people in Palestine that support Hamas. There are people in the U.S. that support Hamas. If you look at my comment section, that's very clear to see. Really all over the world. They are a terrorist organization trying to disguise themselves as a political faction, I guess. So anyway, so let's give a little bit of some background on why this is happening. Basically, if you really want to get down to it, and I got my notes here pulled up, so we're going to pull them up here so we can chat about this a little bit more. But basically, if you want to get down to it, Palestine doesn't feel that Israel should exist. Israel was not formed until 1948, and it was formed by the British government while they had control of Palestine. So why would the British have control of Palestine? Right? That's, I guess, the question. So Britain was given a mandate to govern Palestine after World War I as a result of the League of Nations decision to grant the League of Nations mandate for Palestine to the UK. And there were several reasons for this decision. Now, first off, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, and after World War I, the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire occurred. There was no more Ottoman Empire. And so the collapse of it at the end of World War I left basically a power vacuum in the Middle East, including the region that is now Israel and Palestine, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. The League of Nations, established after the war, was responsible for overseeing the transition of the former Ottoman territories to a new government. And you can kind of think of the League of Nations as a precursor to the United Nations. There was also something called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. I might be saying that wrong because, European words and my American accent. But basically, it was a secret agreement between Britain and France in 1916 that outlined their intentions to divide the Middle East into spheres of influence after the war. Palestine was designated as an area where Britain would have influence and control. Then you have the Balfour Declaration, which is the British government had issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917, expressing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people. And they decided that that should go in Palestine. Part of the reason for that, which we'll talk about in a minute, is because, as Israel argues, or the Jewish people of Israel argue, they have ties to that land for literally thousands of years, even before the existence of Palestine. So the declaration, the Balfour Declaration, played a significant role in Britain's involvement in that region and, again, the establishment of Israel. Plus, there were strategic interests, right? The government's not of any country is not going to do something unless it benefits them. So the British government considered the Middle East, including Palestine, strategically important due to its proximity to the Suez Canal, which was a vital transportation route to the British colonies and interests in Asia and Africa. And I promise once we get through the history stuff, we'll talk about all the stuff that's getting us caught up today. Then there was the League of Nations mandate system. The League of Nations established a mandate system to oversee the administration of territories previously held by defeated powers. And in this case, we're talking about the Ottoman Empire. The mandates were seen as a transitional step towards self-governance, with the mandatory powers, and in this case, Great Britain, responsible for preparing the territory for eventual self-rule, meaning that they weren't planning to be there forever. They were planning to be there basically as an occupation after the war, and then eventually leave them to their own devices and governance. And hopefully, the way it worked, they wanted hopefully to be an ally to them for trade and routes and whatever else Britain needed. Now, as a result of these factors, the League of Nations granted the mandate for Palestine to Britain in 1920, and Britain administered the region until 1948, when Israel was officially established. This period witnessed significant tensions between the Jewish and Arab communities, leading to the complex and contentious situation in the region that continues to this very day. That's what we're going on. So let's kind of take this a step further, and let's talk about the formation of the modern state of Israel, okay, and how and why it was formed. First of all, and again, we'll get through this pretty quickly. We'll rush through it, and then we'll talk about things that are coming up and the day of jihad. So the idea of a Jewish homeland had been discussed among the Jewish communities for literally centuries. But the modern Zionist movement, led by figures like Theodor Herzl, gained momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Zionists advocated for the establishment of a Jewish state in historic Palestine, again, because they felt they had ties for thousands of years, which, I mean, they did. You can go back to the Bible and take a look at that. That's long established. Again, the Balfour Declaration comes up, but we spoke about that. We also spoke about British mandate. What we didn't speak about was the United Nations Partition Plan in 1947. So at 1947, the League of Nations no longer existed. It was officially the United Nations at that point, and they proposed a partition plan for Palestine, which recommended the creation of a separate Jewish and Arab states and the international administration over Jerusalem. And the plan was approved by the UN General Assembly. Now, again, part of this was that after World War I, and then again after World War II, which plays a huge part in the creation of Israel, these countries were on the losing team, and the winners get to do kind of what they want. That's just how it works. You don't have to agree with it. It's just, how it works. So then the Declaration of the State of Israel came in 1948, on May 14th, 1948. There was basically a declaration of independence, and it would also started the 1948 Arab, at the same time, Arab-Israeli war. And here are the reasons for formation. There's historical connection, as I've mentioned. Supporters of Israel's formation argued that the Jews had a historical and religious connection to the land of Palestine dating back thousands of years, and it should be the homeland for the Jewish people. Also, again, we're coming off of World War II. So the persecution of Jews and anti-Semitism and the Holocaust during World War II, which 6 million of Jews were systemically murdered by the Nazis, intensified the desire for a Jewish homeland as a refuge from persecution. And in fact, one of my good friends, mutuals on TikTok, Gidon Lev, who was a concentration camp survivor. He was in a concentration camp, and a few years after the war in the 50s, relocated to Israel. And he obviously is Jewish. So part as a refuge from the persecutions they had experienced, the land where they wouldn't really feel that way, have to fight that. Then there was the Zionist movement, which actively promoted the idea of a Jewish homeland and worked to secure international support, international backing. The Balfour Declaration and the United Nations Partition Plan provided international support for the establishment. And with the formation of Israel, it led to conflicts with the Arab states, including, again, the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and subsequent conflicts that have literally been going on ever since, which have continued to shape the region's history and politics. The Israeli-Palestine conflict remains a central issue in the Middle East as of today. So now, with the history out of the way, let's talk about what's kind of going on over here. Okay, and we'll kind of start from the very beginning. Again, I had to take a lot of notes because I didn't want to get this wrong. This stuff is really important, guys. So if it seems like I'm reading, it's partially because, I am. Because, there's a lot to talk about here. And a lot has happened in the last, I don't know, I think it's been 6 days now. A lot to kind of go over. So basically what happened on this past Saturday, a 7-day-long Jewish festival was going on. It was actually wrapping up. The sirens in Israel, air raid sirens, emergency sirens, whatever they are, you want to call them, started going off. And they realized quickly that it was not a false alarm and that there was a full-fledged surprise attack that was being waged from the air, the sea, and the ground by a ton of Hamas militants. And again, I will say this event is not an excuse for Islamophobia. As a creator on this app, on YouTube, on TikTok, wherever, I am 50% Jewish. I'm not standing against Palestine, but I am standing against Hamas. Okay. It's different. Now we'll talk a little bit why some Hamas or some Palestinians support Hamas. We'll get into that in a little bit, but I just want to make that very clear that let's not utilize this as an excuse for Islamophobia. So on Saturday, thousands of missiles were fired from Gaza, streaked through the sky, and began raining down, not aimed, on just indiscriminate Israeli targets. There were hundreds of bodies left in the streets. Cities and buildings were leveled. I know it looks like, right now I'm actually looking at y'all, but the camera, there we go. Let me see if I can. It's just that we're going to have to work on the position of this camera as we do this. Simultaneously, hundreds of armed fighters of the terrorist group, Hamas, came on motorcycles, followed by bulldozers to breach fences that separated Israel from Gaza, and charged into cities, taking Israeli soldiers off guard and just starting to gun down citizens. So it was basically a lightning-quick, multi-pronged ambush, included dozens of militants coming up in motorboats to storm Israeli beaches and engage in firefights with Israeli forces. Other armed Hamas attackers swooped into Israel throughout smoke-filled skies, as it says, on paragliders. So again, from the sea, from the air, and from the land. So as the attacks started happening, a lot of people started rushing for safety, right? And the terrorists kept infiltrating the country, marching into towns, opening fire on homes, killing citizens at random. They would burst into houses, private residents, citizens not military. They would shoot residents who were begging for their lives, and then they would choose to take others, including women, children, the elderly, taking them hostage and driving them back into Gaza hostage as they screamed for help. So then, as I'm sure a lot of y'all are aware about, the music festival where hundreds of Israeli people were dancing and celebrating throughout the night into the break of dawn. They basically became sitting ducks for Hamas militants. They arrived in vans with their guns blazing, and they basically took out 260 partygoers, people at the festival, and abducted several others. Now, Hamas leaders are currently threatening to kill the hostages one by one and film the executions if their demands are not met. And this goes to what I talked about earlier today in a video on TikTok, and one of the warnings that you've probably seen issued is that there is talk that these executions will be live streamed on various social media platforms. And, you know, when you talk about YouTube and TikTok and X and Instagram and the others that are out there, they do a pretty good job as far as censorship is concerned, but they can't capture everything, right? So that's the concern, and that's why it's like, hey, you might want to keep your kids off some of this stuff this weekend because you can't unsee this kind of stuff. And if you're coming in, thank you for joining now. You can feel free to ask questions in the comments, and once we get to that section, I will definitely make sure to answer them while we're here. I like to make sure that I answer every question that we have for those of y'all who are asking live. And if you're watching this at a later date, at a later time, feel free to ask questions in the comments. I usually try to respond to those as well. It's much easier on YouTube for me to do that than on other platforms. So one of the hardest hit areas is near the Gaza border, and ABC News was actually allowed in there on Tuesday, so 2 days ago. They were able to see, and trigger warning for this, guys, not that the rest of this isn't. I think you know what you're getting into watching this. Entire Israeli families were slaughtered. Bodies of militants were killed, and the attack remained sprawled on the streets, some next to their crashed motorcycles. In nearly every home in Kfar Aza was bullet-riddled. A gaping hole in a nearby border fence was still open and guarded by Israeli soldiers that were still engaging in firefights with the enemy. And let me kind of see if I can show y'all a picture here that I got pulled up from the news. Give me 1 second here. I need to move this over so I can actually see this stuff. Show y'all kind of what this looks like. Okay, so that's kind of what you're looking at here. I wonder if I can make this bigger. I cannot. So that's what you're looking at, right? What they were kind of going through that night. This was on October 8th, and you can see how many missiles were firing through the sky. It's absolutely terrifying, and it's absolutely unnecessary, a loss of life. You know, it's one thing to engage with the military. It's another thing to attack innocent civilians completely unprepared. And that is what makes this if nothing else, is what makes this terrorism. It makes it terrorism. So anyways, that's probably enough of that to see kind of how that goes. There have been bodies of numerous Hamas fighters found along the border. There's been a lot of battles since this past Saturday. And then within hours of the attack, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it a dark day in his country and declared war on Hamas. And a veteran Israeli military official deemed this, I think this is very important, Israel's 9/11, which I would tend to have to agree with that. They've begun the process of naming and counting the dead, both soldiers and civilians. They're saying that it's unprecedented numbers that up until a few days ago seemed fictional and unimaginable. As of Thursday morning, which is today, the death toll in Israel stood at more than 1,200 people. Another 2,900 people were injured. Among the dead were 27 American citizens. The last numbers I saw were 14 were still missing. We have sent our largest warship over. We've sent SEAL Team 6 over in an advisory role to help recover some of the Americans. SEAL Team 6, for those of y'all who aren't aware, which most of y'all probably is the same special ops SEAL team that took out Osama bin Laden. In Gaza, similar numbers, 1,417 people have died, and much higher as far as injuries. Over 6,000 others have been injured since the retaliatory airstrikes by Israel began. At least 447 of the dead in Gaza are children, and 248 are women. So you're not talking about militants. You're talking about women and children. Okay? Terrorism. As a result, and granted, let's just be real. We're not blind by this. We know that a lot of, if not all, the dead in in Gaza were caused by Israeli missiles firing back. At the end of the day, a surprise attack, and it's horrible. Civilians should not be included in conflicts like this. I don't care which side you're on. I stand with Israel, but I don't care which side you're on. It's terrible. But again, the retaliatory attacks for what happened. So I just can't imagine the fear of people on this. The other thing that was interesting about the attack, so the date that they chose was interesting. So in 1973, there was the Yom Kippur War that pitted Israel against Egypt and Syria, and Hamas chose this past Saturday. That was the 50th anniversary of that day. So that's part of the reason why it was chosen. So now let's talk about October 7th. Air raid sirens were sounding in Jerusalem starting around 6:30 in the morning, letting citizens know that there was an attack in progress and saying, hey, you need to take cover. They're estimating that this number is huge. 2,200 rockets were fired towards southern and central Israel, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, by Hamas militants. Now, Hamas is saying that over 5,000 rockets were fired, all of them landing in southern and central Israel. So there's a discrepancy there, but either way, it's huge numbers. One of the missiles slammed into a hospital in an Israeli coastal town. Now, once this happened, a lot of armed Hamas militants on motorcycles, a lot of them on motorcycles, stormed blockaded areas of the Gaza Strip, shooting Jewish settlers in the Gaza Strip. There is actually video footage, which we're not going to show, of Hamas militants taking Israeli citizens, including mothers, children, and elderly, hostage and taking them, out of Israel across the Gaza border. In one of its public messages, the IDF said on Saturday morning that over the past hours, the Hamas terrorist organization launched massive barrages of rockets from Gaza into Israel, and its terrorist operatives have infiltrated into Israel in a number of different locations in the south. Videos posted online captured hundreds of Hamas soldiers breaching the Israeli border from Gaza by boat, pickup trucks, and even motorized paragliders. Now, shortly after the attack began on August 7th, Mohammed Diaf, I think that's saying that, is the commander-in-chief of the Hamas military arm, because there's two arms of Hamas. There's the military and the political arm. Released a video statement claiming responsibility for the attack. And the statement that he made was, the Zionist colonial occupation occupied our Palestine homeland and displaced our people, destroyed our towns and villages, committed hundreds of massacres against our people, killing children, women, and elderly people, and demolishing homes with their inhabitants inside in violation of all international norms, laws, and human rights conventions. That's what the statement said. And that was shortly after the attacks began. And then on August 7th, around 10:30 a.m. their time, Israeli jet fighters launched retaliatory strikes into Gaza, And there were videos shown of high-rise residential buildings being bombarded and flattened by Israeli airstrikes. Again, I don't support attacking civilians. That's just what I'm going to say. I just don't think that's proper warfare. That's me. Then Benjamin Netanyahu at around 11:30 made his first public statement telling his country that Israel is at war. It's not a so-called military operation, not another round of fighting, but war. Then at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, our time, the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin released a statement saying that he is closely monitoring the situation, extends condolences to the family of those who lost their lives, and that over the coming days, the Department of Defense will work to ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself and its civilians, protect its civilians from indiscriminate violence and terrorism, according to our Secretary of Defense. And then a separate U.S. defense official said that Austin had a call with his team Saturday morning, and Israel falls under CENTCOM's area of responsibility. Then at 9:30 a.m., so about an hour after that, President Biden was briefed, talking about what happened. Then at 10 a.m., it said that we're going to be, basically our Secretary of State, that we're going to stay in close contact with our Israeli partners. The statement that we made at that time by the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, was the United Nations unequivocally condemns the appalling attacks by Hamas terrorists against Israel, including civilians and civilian communities. There is never any justification for terrorism. We stand in solidarity with the government and people of Israel and extend our condolences for the Israeli lives lost in these attacks. So this is all happening very quick on the 7th, guys. Then at around 11 a.m. Eastern time, the White House announced that Biden had spoken with Benjamin Netanyahu, telling his prime minister that the U.S. condemns Hamas' assault on Israel. And he said, the statement basically that Biden said in a televised statement was, I made it clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu that we stand ready to offer all appropriate means of support to the government and people of Israel. Terrorism is never justified. Israel has a right to defend itself and its people, and the United States warns against any other party hostile to Israel seeking advantage in this situation. My administration's support for Israel's security is rock solid and unwavering, according to the president. Then several hours went by, and about 5 p.m. Again, I'm just trying to go through this real quick, guys, to get y'all caught up before we discuss what we're looking at today and tomorrow. So then around 5 p.m. Eastern time, Netanyahu makes a televised statement to address the people of Israel, repeating his earlier statement, saying that we will win. He talks about that Hamas this morning launched a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel and its citizens, that they have been in since the early hours of the morning. He convened the heads of security establishment and ordered to clear out all communities that have been infiltrated by terrorists. It was currently being carried out as the time he was making that statement. At the same time, he ordered an extensive mobilization of reserves. And for what that's worth, they called up every single reservist that they have. Every part of the Israeli military is currently active and activated. But they ordered extensive mobilization of reserves, and that we will return fire of a magnitude that the enemy has not known. The enemy will pay unprecedented price. In the meantime, he calls on the citizens of Israel to strictly adhere to the directives of the IDF and Homefront Command, and we are at war and we will win it. Then on October 8th, around 5 a.m. Eastern time, 30 Israeli police were killed in fighting, where basically a gunman in Hamas took control of the police station. Israeli initials announced that the fighting is ongoing Sunday morning in 6 places, basically 2 miles from the border. Another rocket injured people. And let's just kind of now talk about hostages here. So the Israeli government, this is on October 8th, around 9 a.m. Eastern time, confirmed that a number of civilian soldiers had been taken hostage. At least 100 Israeli citizens at that time and soldiers were being held hostage by Hamas fighters. And the videos posted online showed packed the all-night music festival that we talked about in the desert in southern Israel near Gaza border being attacked by rockets, and then fighters showing up in vans on the ground and just mowing people down and taking them hostage, including women and children who they drug away back to Gaza. And again, 260 bodies were confirmed to be there. So as of 1 p.m., it was announced that 700 people were dead in Israel, 2,100 injured. Palestine at that time said 370 dead, 2,200 injured. And so let's just kind of fast forward to some of this stuff, because you know that this is all a lot of fighting. There are Americans there. There were French citizens there that they know that were killed in the attacks. And I'm trying to go through my notes here real quick. I had a lot of stuff in here. We're going to just kind of scroll through them. And so we know we've talked about some of this earlier. So let's just go ahead and end this discussion. And before we talk about today, I'm going to look at the comment board here and see what kind of questions we have. If any, there might be any. Might not be any. Okay, there haven't really been any questions. All right, well, thank you guys for hanging out. It's very chill in here tonight. Anybody can saw pictures of the beheaded babies today. That will okay. I want to address this, Judy. So that comment was actually walked back about, I don't know, 14 hours ago, saying that it was not confirmed by Israel or Biden that they saw them. The statement was walked back. If you Google it, that was what was originally reported and what I said in my original video on TikTok. It's not saying that it did. They're not saying that it didn't happen, but they're not confirming that it did at this point. So for what that's worth, at this moment, it's not confirmed information. So now let's talk about what we have happening today. Okay, and I think we'll show you a video to start that. So let me share this screen real quick. We're going to show you Khalid Masal, who was a former head of the political wing of Hamas, and his statement that was made earlier. I don't think it was even today. I think it was earlier this week. And we're just now hearing about it because it's tomorrow. He's calling for Friday 13th to be a day of jihad. And I've seen people in my comments saying like, "Oh, jihad just means prayers." No, it fucking doesn't. It does not mean prayers. If you Google, which Google's free for these people who say this, but if you Google the definition of jihad, I'm going to say it exactly. So we can't misconstrue it, right? Jihad, a noun, Islam, a struggle or fight against the enemies of Islam. That is the meaning. It's not prayers, guys. Struggle or fight against the enemies of Islam. And to Hamas, that is the West, that is the Israelis, that is the Jewish people. So that being said, let me play this video for y'all real quick, and we'll chat about it. We can get it to play. We don't want that. We want technical difficulties, guys. I don't want the area. This is what we want. This is the one we want.
أدعوكم وأنا معكم وكلنا نتحمل المسؤولية إلى أمور أبدأ بما اعتدنا عليه لكن نريده بسقف أعلى. أولا الغضب، أن ننزل في الميادين والساحات والشارع العربي والإسلامي وعلى مدى الجاليات في كل مكان. هناك دعوة يوم الجمعة، جمعة طوفان الأقصى، وجهوا رسالة عبر الساحات والميادين، رسالة غضب.
Let's pause there for a minute. You saw what it said, a message of anger. Go to the streets and deliver a message of anger.
أننا مع فلسطين، مع غزة، مع الأقصى، مع القدس، وأننا جزء من هذه المعركة. هذا أولا. ثانيا، غزة تستغيث بكم لنجدتها إغاثيا وماليا بكل ما تملكون. كل من يستطيع أن يقدم هذه لحظة الحقيقة. ماذا أعددنا لهذا الجواب؟ إذن نحن أمام الحقيقة، وهنا أقول بكل وضوح وبلا لجلجة ولا تردد، هذه لحظة أن تنخرط الأمة في المعركة.
You saw that this is the moment to join the Arab nation and to fight with them. This is not somebody who wants peaceful protests.
أن نقاتل معهم. أنا أخاطب طبعا دول الطوق أولا، الأردن، سوريا، لبنان، مصر، كل أبنائها وبناتها رسميا وشعبيا. واجبكم أكبر لأنكم الأقرب إلى فلسطين. يا عشائر الأردن، يا أبناء الأردن، يا إخواني وأخواتي في الأردن، من كل جهاتكم واتجاهاتكم ومنابتكم الكريمة، هذه لحظة.
This is a moment of truth. The borders are close and you know your responsibility. None of this, again, this is not overly cryptic, guys.
الحقيقة الحدود
It applies to all nations.
كل يعرف مسؤوليته. هذا ينطبق على كل الشعوب. أيها العلماء الذين تدرسون الجهاد في سبيل الله وتبشرون.
There it is. I wish it would stop doing that when I pause it. But to the scholars that teach jihad, to the fighters and the martyrs.
المجاهدين والشهداء تدرسون الجهاد في أبواب الفقه. يا من يدرس ويدرس، هذه لحظة التطبيق حتى لا يظل كأن كلامنا مجرد كلام.
So let's stop that. So let's talk about that. That's what we're talking about for tomorrow, that it was called on a day of jihad. And this, guys, is not fear mongering. One of the things that was said specifically was for the U.S. because we have sent military support over there. We have very vocally said that we stand with Israel as a country. We lend our support to Israel. We are also the West, which we'll talk about more than just America here in a second. But these terrorist organizations are not the West. Now, one thing that I do want to point out, and I got this earlier, and I think that this is a really good way. So before I go further, let's talk about, in case you don't know your basic, we will call it terrorist geography, so to speak. So the Taliban is in Afghanistan. There's a lot of noise coming out from my other room. Hezbollah is in Lebanon. ISIS is in Iraq and Syria. Hamas, Palestine. The Houthis, Al-Qaeda is Yemen, and Al-Shabaab is Somalia. Okay, so when we're talking about different terrorist organizations, a lot of these organizations work with each other. They feel very strongly about the same types of feelings in these terrorist organizations. They all share the same sentiments. They're just called something different. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Okay, Hamas is a terrorist organization, y'all. And what they were saying basically is that tomorrow is a day of jihad. Take to the streets. Now, could something happen tomorrow, or could nothing happen tomorrow? Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing that people have said in my comments, well, why would they warn you? Well, we often get warnings as to what may or may not happen. That's not uncommon. They don't tell us where, they don't tell us when, and they don't tell us what. There were warnings prior to 9/11. There were warnings prior to the World Trade bombing that happened, I forget, like the early 90s, mid 90s, et cetera. And they're out there, and they warned us on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 that something would happen. Nothing did. And let's hope that that's the case. That would be the best case scenario, that absolutely nothing happens, and that all these videos that we're talking about for, to be vigilant tomorrow, are for nothing. But I would rather be safe than sorry. That is my opinion. But Hamas is not representative of Palestine. Hamas is in Palestine, and it is an far extremist. I'm going to say far right. It's just a far extremist group. It is an extremist terroristic group. So the question might be, and I really want to have this discussion because somebody earlier in here, and I don't think he's in here tonight. I wish he was. But somebody in here tonight was talking about how I don't know anything that this is political. And I keep arguing that it's not political, even though Hamas has a political segment. And I'll explain my reasoning in a second. So let me I've got my notes here. Let me pull up. So now Hamas is considered a Palestinian political and militant organization, and it's been a player in that area, the Israeli, and in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for a long time. It was founded initially in '87 during the first Intifada, which is the Palestinian uprising against the Israeli rule in the occupied territories, and it's evolved to become multifaceted, and it's got both political, as I mentioned earlier, political and military wings. And its ultimate goal is the establishment of an independent Palestinian state, including the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, with Jerusalem as its capital, which is currently Israel. Gaza, on the other hand, is a small strip of land, just so you guys understand the geography, on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. It's part of the Palestinian territories and is bordered by Israel. And this is where they actually have control. To the east and north of Egypt, let me say it again. It's part of the Palestinian territories and is bordered by Israel to the east and north, and Egypt to the south. And the Gaza Strip has a population of around 2 million Palestinians and has been long been a focal point of any Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But let's talk about why would citizens allow for power in that area? All right, let's talk about that. First of all, Hamas has garnered significant support among the Palestinian population in Gaza, owing its resistance against Israeli occupation and its provision of social services to the community. Basically, it does things to be nice to the community, does things to help out. Its reputation as a resistance organization, not terrorist. They position themselves as a resistance organization against Israel, and it's won by, with considerable grassroots support. It's all about marketing and propaganda, guys. Social services. They operate a network of social services, including schools, hospitals, welfare programs. And this all sounds nice. And I want y'all to keep this in mind, because the next thing I say after we talk about this, I think is going to be really kind of interesting. And obviously that helps maintain popularity among the people of Gaza. And it's allowed for the organization to build strong grassroots base and, again, provide for needs of the population in Gaza. On top of that, there is armed militancy. They maintain a military wing. They've engaged in conflicts with Israel. They use rockets and guerrilla warfare tactics. It's given the image of a group willing to take up arms in defense of Palestinian rights. Again, they're positioning themselves to be resistance leaders, not the terrorists that they actually are. Then for political control, so they do have political control, which I mentioned. They're still not a political organization. Again, I'm going to circle back to this. I think y'all will find this interesting. I hope you do. Following a 2006 Palestinian legislative elections, Hamas won a majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council, granting it political control over Gaza. Now, this did result in a political split, with Fatah controlling the West Bank and Hamas governing Gaza, and this division has been a source of tension and conflict within the Palestinian territories themselves. Then you also have some external support that they've received from various regional, regions and countries like, Iran, Qatar, Turkey, which have provided financial and political backing. And that external support has also helped Hamas maintain its power grip that it has on Gaza. Now, it is important to note this, and we talked about this a lot tonight, that Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by several countries, including Israel, United States, the European Union, and it's because of its use of violence and tactics that target specifically civilians. They don't target military, they target civilians. They target innocent, unarmed people, women, children, elderly. That is what they do. It's a very complex situation, guys. Now, here's what I want to talk about. Pablo Escobar. And you're like, what the hell, Justin, does Pablo Escobar have to do with Hamas? Well, nothing really. But in Medellin, Colombia, Pablo Escobar spent $5,000 a month on rubber bands. He made so much money. He had so much money hidden, he didn't know what to do with it. Money buys influence. Money buys power. He created soccer teams, schools, all sorts of humanitarian efforts throughout Medellin. People loved him. He was great. He offered armed support. At the end of the day, he was a drug lord. He got involved in politics, tried to get elected. Ultimately, took out an airplane to get one of his political adversaries out of the way, killing a lot of people. He was a cartel leader. He was a criminal. He was a terrorist in his own right. But you could argue that he had political influence, just like you could argue that Hamas has political influence. You can argue that the Taliban has political influence, because they do, but they're not political. They're terrorist organizations that end up getting to be political by conquering and taking things over. That is what they are. So, going back to what we're talking about here, will tomorrow be a day of jihad? Should you keep your children home from school? What should we do? I don't know. I can't tell you that. It depends on where you are. Stay vigilant, which you should always do. What I can tell you is that since the last live that I did here, live stream, I can tell you that in London, several Jewish schools have been closed. Excuse me, guys. Several Jewish schools have been closed. In New York City, every police officer has been called up to duty. Not that they have anything that they're saying is specific to New York City, but to have increased security. Where I live in Nashville, increased security. Many of the bigger cities across the country, increased security. A lot of people associated with the Jewish religion, mosques, synagogues, etc., are told, they're either those events, things that are happening at those events are either closing, or they're being told to be, again, extra vigilant. The issue with this, and I've seen a lot of people talk about the, let's fuck around and find out, Second Amendment supporters. Okay, look, I'm not anti-Second Amendment, even a little bit. Definitely not. But here's what you're talking about when you deal with these people. all the people in my comment section who have been talking about this and who might be watching this, it doesn't matter if you're pro 2A. It doesn't matter if you have all the guns in the world. These people are not afraid of death. To them, it is a great honor to die for this cause and guarantees them a place in heaven because they are dying for what they believe in. And typically, they don't come at you with guns. They come at you with bombs, suicide bombers, car bombs. Your gun's not going to handle that. And on top of that, as somebody, I cannot take credit for this comment, as somebody said, if 10 terrorists showed, like true terrorists, 10 members of Hamas showed up at their house with guns, all the 2A people would just shit themselves. That's just what I have to say. What you're dealing with is not your normal criminal organization or, independent criminal. This is a well-organized militant group with a lot of training. They don't use guns because they don't have to. And they don't care if they die. Because even if you kill them and they're wearing something like a vest that they have a button on, the minute you shoot them, that button's released and you're gone too. So that is my point. Will something happen tomorrow? Hopefully not. I hope that this is all for nothing. But I'd rather be safe than sorry. Now, all that said, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and close out this live session, and I will be going live on TikTok here shortly. I may come back live on here, but we're going to close this out because I just wanted people to have an understanding of what was going on, where we could speak freely about it without TikTok censors and having to use, words. So hopefully this was helpful. Definitely, if you're watching this now or you're watching it later, drop your thoughts in the comments. Before I go, I will take a look. It doesn't look like anybody's got any questions. So I will say, thank you guys for hanging out, joining. If you're watching this and you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that follow button or subscribe button. And you can follow me on TikTok too, Justin on TikTok. And to get to all my social media, you can see the link down at the bottom, JustinOnTikTok.com, as well as my podcast, 50 Words for Murder, which all can be gotten to from here, the website, JustinOnTikTok.com. So again, thank you guys for hanging out, and I will see y'all over on TikTok.